Hello, this is a short online lecture on working in teams, and it's part of the How to Succeed as a Student lecture series. The purpose of this video is to identify some of the good characteristics of effective teams and to reflect on teamwork and how it's used in practice in your academic study. We're also going to look at some do's and don'ts for working in teams. Why are we going to look at these things? Well, students who work well in teams tend to do better in group assessments. It helps teamwork to be more effective, but also a lot more enjoyable. And overall, by the end of this video, I hope that you feel better about working in teams and approaching teamwork as you progress in your studies. So I'd like you to pause the video and just jot down a couple of do's and don'ts for working in teams. So pause the video now. Okay, we're going to move on. I'm going to show you a couple of models of teamwork and have a brief discussion about these models. You can see a lot more about these, the theory behind these teamwork models in the further resources that I've linked at the end of this video. But very briefly, just for now, this is one teamwork model, the Thomas Kilmann conflict mode instrument. And you can see that it's plotted on two axes. There's assertiveness up here. So as the arrow goes up, that's an increasing amount of assertiveness. And the other axis is on cooperativeness. Now down here, at the bottom end of both, you're not very assertive and you're not very cooperative. You've got the avoidance mode of engagement with your team, which is you don't really care how things are going to work. You don't have a stake in it. You're just avoiding the task. As you move up in the assertiveness scale, this avoidance becomes competition. So you're not cooperating at all, but you're very assertive. So you're becoming competitive up here. And this usually comes out in the format of you want to win at something, and you winning means that everybody else in the team is losing. So it's pushing through your own agenda in a non-cooperative way. Conversely, over here, we've got the accommodation mode of engagement, which is that you're not very assertive, but you're very cooperative. And what this means is that you're essentially going to go along with what other team members are suggesting, essentially letting them get their way, and you aren't contributing anything much yourself. So you're accommodating. Now, we don't want any of these three things here. Ideally, what we want is collaboration, which is where all students work together in an equally cooperative and assertive way. That means every student in the team gets to contribute and gets to add their own views and opinions into the teamwork process and influence the result. So this is called collaboration. This is true collaboration, where you're discussing, you're not avoiding anything, you're cooperating, but you're being assertive enough to get your own viewpoints across. Now, there is another mode here in the middle, which is compromise. This isn't true collaboration, but sometimes perhaps you're going to need to end up in this mode, compromising. So perhaps there's something that you desperately want to happen, but the other members of the team don't. So you might have to compromise, which is moderately assertive and moderately cooperative. So what we're hoping is that your teamwork in GSA is in either one of these two modes. Now, it's important to say that no one person is always competitive or is always accommodating. So you can adjust your mode of engagement with the team as you go. And what I'd like you to do is try and end up with true collaboration, but if that's not possible, compromise is fine too. There are other models of teamwork, and this one's called the 5 Co's, and there's a link down here if you want to read more about that. So again, it's plotted here, but this time it's team effectiveness here against the interactions along the bottom axis. So down here you've got competition. Again, it's the least effective way of working in a team according to this model. So competition is when the team members are actively in rivalry with one another. Conflict refers to when you might have the same goal, but you're approaching it in a different way, and the conflict arises from these different ways of approaching what is in fact a common goal. Coexistence, you're learning to tolerate each other, but it's still not very fruitful. Coordination is when the team is learning to assign tasks to meet these overlapping goals. And then again, true collaboration is up here, and it's the most effective way of working in a team, ensuring that everybody contributes, that you maximize the value of the work you're doing, because everybody's getting a chance to contribute and a chance to say what they think about the project, which results in much more work getting done in the long term. So again, there's more information about these in the links at the end if you want to look them up. Let's move on to the do's and don'ts. Now, I hope you have your noted down do's and don'ts that I asked you to do earlier. Let's see how they compare to mine. Let's have a look at some do's. So firstly, and very, very importantly, please read the brief. There is no point to handing in a beautiful piece of work that isn't actually the question that your tutor was asking you to answer. So read the brief carefully, critically analyze it, underline bits of it, decide what's the most important thing. Once you've read the brief carefully, make sure that you and your team meet the brief. Remind your other team members regularly what the brief is, and plan a plan of action on how to meet that brief. Do share credit for successes within the team. Effective team working is not about claiming all the credit for yourself on a bit that went particularly well. It's about acknowledging the efforts of others. Do create good documentation for your team goals and objectives, and this can arise from reading the brief, and this is a very good strategy for ensuring that the team never gets sidetracked and everything you do is focused on meeting that question, that investigation that you've been asked to do. Do contribute actively. Don't engage in avoidance behaviours, and this will weaken the team overall, but it will in particular weaken the value that you get out of doing that work. Do try and determine each team member's strengths and weaknesses. This doesn't have to be explicit, but if somebody is volunteering themselves as having great skills already in a particular task that needs to be done, great, that's fantastic. Utilize that, use it to build on the success of the team as a whole. And again, if there's somebody who says, I'm just not confident with doing that aspect of it, if it's not required of them to do it, delegate it to somebody else in the team. And be honest about your own strengths and weaknesses as well, all with the view of making sure the workload is equally shared across the whole team. If you end up having disagreements, that's fine. There will be disagreements within teams. See them as learning opportunities. Try and investigate the reasons why somebody's disagreeing with you. Even if they're not articulating it well at first, if you drill down into that, you might really learn something. You might find that their reasons for disagreeing with you are actually very, very valid, and you just hadn't given them a chance to express it. So do try and learn from each other if you find yourself coming into conflict on a team. And use these opportunities as a way to, again, enhance the task that the team is undertaking. When you're looking at solutions for whatever the task is that you've been set to work on in your team, do encourage a little bit of out of the box thinking. Now, you do have to remain grounded in the task that you've been set, this idea of meeting the brief and reminding yourself what the brief is. But you can actually meet the brief sometimes in a really very creative way. So don't shut down out of the box ideas when they arise. Consider them and consider if they can add something to your delivery of the objective, and to make it really very interesting and very creative. And finally, embrace the constraints that you're working under. If you've been given a very, very short deadline, remember that your work will be assessed in line with that short deadline, and really embrace those constraints. If it's a very short deadline, use it as an opportunity to work really intensively on something for a short period of time. Or if the constraints are different, perhaps you are to meet once a week for the rest of the term. Again, use those constraints and plan your work around it. Some don'ts then. Don't change the task. Even if it's changing it to something you'd much rather be doing, don't change the task. Meet the brief. Don't talk over your teammates. Try and ensure that everybody has opportunity in a group to contribute, because teamwork relies on this diversity of opinion, and the multiple perspectives that your different team members will bring. So don't talk over others, let other people have their say. And if you find yourself in a position of being the one that is kind of chairing the team discussion, try and make sure that you go around and give everybody a chance to speak, and call on people who perhaps aren't contributing. Ask them to engage in the process and help them to become equal team members. If you're somebody who is perhaps one of those people who doesn't want to get involved in conflict, don't just agree with the loudest voice in the room. Take your time, construct the point that you want to make in your head, and then question, because this critical questioning is what gives your work the additional rigor that will get you the best grades. So don't just go along with whoever is shouting the loudest. Again, if you find that there is some kind of personal conflicts going on, it's very easy to let them interfere with the actual work being done. So try your best not to let conflicts affect the work. Some sort of quite strict division of work might be necessary if you're in conflict with another team member, or if two other members of your team end up in conflict. So try and manage that conflict in the most productive way that you can. Don't use the same techniques every project. If you're in the same team, even, you might be tempted to do the next task in the same way that you successfully did the first task. But try and experiment a little bit. Try and do something original and interesting, and have a play with it. Be creative. As long as you're meeting the brief, there's no reason not to meet the brief in a completely different way than the same techniques that you used last time. And using multiple techniques will broaden your learning, and it will give you a much more well-rounded skill set as you progress. Never rely on one person to do all the work. Not only will they be put under a very unfair amount of pressure, the actual submission will be worse because of it. It's important that you all contribute equally, because teamwork exercises are designed for a large number of people to be working on them. So it's very obvious if one person has done all the work, and your grades will suffer as a result. Don't get distracted. There might be really interesting side projects that arise from a task that you've been given. Don't get distracted. Use the documentation that you've produced to really keep yourself and your team on target. And if you've divided up the work into smaller tasks, make sure that you stay focused on your task as well. Don't start trying to do somebody else's work when you haven't done your own work yet. Don't criticize. This is very important to maintain a happy team, but it also affects the quality of the work. So if somebody else has produced something that you feel is not up to standard, don't criticize it. It's okay to give constructive feedback or to reflect on work that's done, but criticizing somebody else or their work is never going to result in a good outcome. Once again, don't lose sight of the main objective of what you're trying to do. Use the documentation, and keep focused on task. And finally, don't run out of time. You will have been given very clear instructions about when and what you're expected to hand in. So make sure that you plan ahead. Plan the whole development of this group project over however much time you have, in order to spread the work equally across the weeks or the days that you have to produce it. Do not leave everything till the end. Again, your work will suffer if you don't exercise good time management in this process, and share that with your team. Here are the further resources that I spoke about. You are free to look these up, and there's lots of other helpful resources out there on working in teams. I hope this was useful, and again, thanks for listening.